Thank you to our 4 sponsors for supporting our podcast: Johnny Russell's Art Caterers and Milltown Pies, Alexander Grace Law, Jez and Lisa's Spoonful of Sweets, and SPE Furnishings. Links to their websites are available in the show notes and on our website. Don't forget to subscribe to get all the latest episodes as soon as they're released.
Good afternoon everybody, and welcome to the Housecast, the legendary podcast that has been going now since, I think we started before COVID, and we are getting towards 100 episodes. So this is a bit of a different type of podcast that we're hoping to put together and that everyone will enjoy. I've been chatting to these two guests for a number of weeks, probably months now, around the work that they do away from the cricket club and the research that they do, etc. They both have been down the cricket club, believe it or not, even longer than me or Blaise. Fantastic people, do a lot of work over and above what we're going to talk about now, but I'd like to just talk about and go back through the history of the cricket club. So the first guest I'd like to introduce is Anne Cochrane. Hello Anne, welcome.
Hello Jess, thank you for having me.
No, it's totally fine. No, I really appreciate it's taking a little bit of organising to get it together. We're doing this for the benefit of the listeners. We're doing this live, as in we're all in the same room, as opposed to Zoom, which will be interesting to see how it comes out and give us some feedback, how people think this sounds, etc. Is it better because we're in the same room? So Anne, we've known each other for so many years. When I first started playing, and you knew my mum and dad and everything else that was going on, and just explain very roughly and briefly about your involvement at the cricket club, when you started coming down, why you came down, what you can remember, just very briefly.
Well, I started coming down as a little girl with my dad Jack, and I think there are some people still who remember Jack because he was a member here for a long time. He was on the committee for a period of time in the 60s, I think. Yeah. And I came on as a little girl. I helped in the tea room as a little girl, selling pop. I can remember taking the caps off the fizzy pop in the tea room, and it stems from there. So eventually my son Neil McSweeney, who again some people down here will still remember, played for the junior teams. He played second 11, and he also made some appearances for the first 11 before he went off to university and he stopped there. And I've just had a continuous involvement. I live locally, and when I came to retire, I was looking for something to take my interest, and I decided that because I had the knowledge of the cricket club, I had some archive that had come from my dad's home when he died, and he'd saved that for the cricket club. I decided to concentrate on what was on my doorstep and look into the Lowerhouse heritage, because for something to be going from 1862 as a working class institution and still be going is quite an achievement, I think.
Yeah, I didn't realise that it had come from your dad, a lot of the material that you got. That's really interesting. So there's all that material that your dad's gathered throughout his life, I take?
Well, I think he just was the custodian of it because he lived longer, I think, than the other chaps who were of his generation, and he had the sense, because he did like history, that the stuff was worth preserving, and we don't have a lot, but what we do have is really interesting, I think, and we have annual general meeting reports going back to 1870 something, and these are all online now. That was what I really wanted. I wanted them to be digitised so anybody can look at them.
So those are now on the website?
They're on our website.
Yeah.
But they were digitised by the crickethistory.website,
Right.
which is a partnership between the Lancashire League, Nigel at the Lancashire League,
Yes.
and Pete Griffiths at this cricket history website, and he's digitised a lot of stuff for the Lancashire League, and we sent him all our stuff last year, and that's been digitised.
So people can go and look at it at the leisure, etc.
Yes.
What about if anyone listening to this has any other material that could be useful? Can I take it? You'd be the one that would have a look at it? And
well, yes, they can get in touch by the website. Yes,
brilliant.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Thanks, Anne. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned about your dad and about Neil. I remember your dad and my dad being down many times, clearing up on Sundays and after the bonfire and everything. You know, some really good memories of people when the times were tough and the cricket wasn't great.
They
were applying for re-election all the time. But those characters, along with another probably dozen chaps at that time, kept everything going. And I really appreciate that. Thanks ever so much. Our second guest this afternoon is someone else who's watched cricket for as long as I can remember, always has a keen interest and has the odd comment to make on some forums, whether it's in programmes or other mediums over the years, and that's Paul Hargreaves.
Hi, Jez.
Hello, Paul. Thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah. My involvement in Lowerhouse started in 1970. I remember the day itself. I can't tell you what month. Right. I'd moved to the Rosegrove area, and I came down here with Jeff Wilkinson, who went on to be a player for Lowerhouse in the 70s, and still has an involvement in the club. It was the only time ever I sneaked into the club. Shock horror. I owe them about £5.
Yeah.
It was in the area of where the cottages were, but they'd been pulled down, and it's where the substation was. And I'd said to Jeff, I said, you know, Jeff, I've enough money to get on, but I haven't enough money for popping a marathon. And he said, solve that, do what I do. And so we jumped the wall. And there was a big enough crowd that you couldn't you could hide in the crowd. And so we did that. And then Jeff disappeared, and I wondered where he'd gone. And then about a quarter of an hour later, he's going around selling league handbooks. I thought, well, that's one way of doing it, making a profit on the day, not even paying to come in. So that's 1970. I became a member in the middle 80s, but I watched Lowerhouse all through the 70s. Became a member in the mid 80s, and 1992 I think I became a patron. So I've been a patron for 30 years. When Mark Whitehead produced programmes for the club, probably about 15 years ago, I used to write a column, as you probably remember, Jez.
I do.
Sometimes a little bit controversial, sometimes a little bit critical, because it was a semi-independent production, and Mark always liked to stir things up a little bit. And so sometimes even David Renner would sort of get on to me. Don't quite agree with what you said today, he'd say sometimes. And I'd say, well, that's the freedom of the press, I claim, isn't it? And now, of course, we don't produce programmes, sadly, anymore. And I've done a fair few articles for your son Adam on the website, Yeah. You were talking about the bad old days watching Lowerhouse. In my experience, the 70s weren't the bad old days, because we weren't very good, and every win was treasured. We weren't expected to win, and it was great listening to some of the away fans if we beat them. We shouldn't be getting beat with Lowerhouse. Terrible. And they were so upset that I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And now, in the last, say, 15 years, when we've become a strong team and we're expected to win, the defeats hurt. Yeah. Whereas they never hurt in the past.
No.
They were expected. And a win's not treasured as much as it used to be.
Yeah.
So that's really my involvement, really.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Paul. And you're right. I mean, you talked about the 70s. I started playing first team in the 80s, and we weren't so good then. There were a couple of years where we had, with Lofty's input, that we had some good performances, but there were a lot of occasions where, I did find it as a player quite difficult when we were playing, certainly Haslingden, Burnley, East Lancs, you know, and they would, the odd win, yeah, we would treasure it. But they not only beat us, sometimes it was humiliation, and sometimes it was, you know, they weren't very kind to us.
But at least the 1980s were probably better than the 60s, 70s.
I'm sure, yeah.
You know, the league positions were starting to improve.
They were.
And we didn't stand out as sort of a re-election club every year. So things were a bit better in your early years at the club.
And that is possibly because of the junior sections that were created then. From my understanding prior to that, it just wasn't the case. You know, certainly in the 70s, 60s and back, there was no junior sections. There was just about a second 11. So thanks very much, Paul. Thanks for letting us know about your involvement. The pair of you, I'd like you just to explain to the listeners of what you've been pulling together over the last few years, will it be?
Well, this particular project is just a fairly recent...
Over the winter, really, I'd say.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. I mean, I've used the archive material that we have, and Paul has done a lot from Paul has the knowledge in his head,
right,
I think. I need it on paper.
Yeah,
so
I watch most of these games, you know.
I've used the archive material that we had and a subscription to the British Newspaper Archive, which is a fantastic resource for anybody who wants to look at things that were published about cricket and life, anything really. I've used those to tease out some stories that I thought were interesting, but it's only with the advent of your Adam taking on the website that there was somewhere to feed it into.
Right.
And really, Adam's been tremendously supportive and helpful to me, so that I've been doing things because I wanted to do them, but he's given me an outlet to put them to a wider public and hope that there might be the odd person who also finds them interesting. And once they're out there, aren't they?
Exactly. And I can assure you, Anne, there are lots of people who already find it interesting, already enjoy reading the articles that go out there. And the beauty of social media these days is, as you say, it's a little bit like the podcast, but we stumbled across this. We all have these memories and funny stories and cricket games in our mind. And Stan and myself were constantly saying we should write these down, because when we're gone,
that's right,
those memories, our kids and their kids telling these daft stories about these old blokes that you can't remember, wouldn't work. So now with podcasts, they're there, and Adam assures me they're there forever to listen to. So yours even more. It's more importantly that all those going back decades are now secure for other people to read long after we've all gone. So it's absolutely commendable, Anne, that the pair of you are putting everything together as you are. So this particular project, how did this come about? Why did you decide to pull this together that you've done over the last 12 months or so?
I think Anna has a big interest in Tommy Shutt and as a person and that era. And my interest is really she twisted my arm to get involved.
Well,
okay.
No, that's not strictly true. We do. We had an inquiry to the website, which Adam dealt with, like he always does, in a very open and welcoming manner, from a chap who was researching the history of Perthshire Cricket Club in Scotland. And they'd lost all their archive in a fire in 1913, I think it was, because the suffragettes had set fire to the pavilion. So the Perthshire Cricket Club didn't have any archive, and he'd found a framed team photo, and he was almost sure that it was from 1897, which was the first of Tommy's 2 years as professional at Perthshire. And if he could just identify Tommy, he could be certain that was the 1897 team. So we were able to help him with that. We found a little photo in the local press and sent it to him. And he sent us back the photo. And when he sent us that photo, and you can see Tommy Shutt is the only one of the team. This is on the website, people can see this. Tommy's standing slightly to one side of the team photo, and we can see him full length, and he's looking at the camera, and he just looks like a modern man. He looks like he could step out today and turn out.
He looks like an athlete.
He looks like that as well. He looks like a young athlete, like you say, full of his own ability, I think. He's got a bit of an attitude on him, and he's posed there with a bit of and he's looking like, come on, let's get on with it. And the rest of the team have facial hair, they have belts made out of club ties, and they look like Victorian men. He doesn't. He looks like a modern man, and that sparked my interest in him, because it turned him from a statistic or somebody that Paul had mentioned various times because he was such a good cricketer. It turned him into a person. So I suggested to him, I hadn't realised, but we had very little on the website actually about him.
Okay.
So I suggested to Paul that we put a proper profile together. He does the cricket and I do the research into the social side of his life story.
Right. Before we move on from that, that is a fantastic photo and a story of how you've come about this.
I think
if
so.
I can just explain to the listeners, and it might be you might not want to do it now, listeners, but at some stage, please go onto the website and have a look at this photo. It's from 1897, and as Anne says, it's a Perthshire Cricket Club with the professional, which it outlines, explains where he's standing, and talks about the fire and why they contacted us and for some help. So it's almost a little bit, it's almost investigative type journalism,
yes.
where you're looking at.
Who do you think you are?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, can you find this person? And
yes.
And so, how did you know that was the same Tommy Shutt?
Well, we had a photo. Well, we knew. Well, once we started, he sparked it off.
Okay.
So we started looking into it, and we knew that Tommy had indeed. Well, he knew as well that Tommy had been pro in 1897, 1898.
Yes.
And so I've lost my thread.
Well, what it was, if you look at the 1911 handbook, when Tommy was pro at Rishton, you could tell it was the same person. He'd aged a few years, because it was 14 years later.
Yeah.
But the guy in Perth, as soon as he saw that picture, he knew that was Tommy Shutt.
Yes,
Tommy Shutt.
He was able to date it then.
So you've put them together.
So we put them together, and that then was the catalyst for doing a proper profile of Tommy Shutt, who was a Lowerhouse man. He was a Lowerhouse amateur, became a professional, and we looked at his life story, and that's became the project. So that's
Brilliant.
what we've done.
And we'd also like to thank Nigel Stockley because of all the work he's done in sort of collating all the Lancashire League details. That we could sort of look at almost every game he played. Yeah. And just tell how good a player he was.
Yeah, and that's worth reiterating, that Nigel's work, helps us all with the podcast, with all the history, etc., etc. So when that's come in, obviously we all know Tommy Shutt is the leading wicket taker at Lowerhouse. You knew that as well at the time, obviously, in liaison with Paul. That's where Paul came in. So you've got this photograph. Adam's done what he's done to dig things out, and then it's over to Paul, really, is it? For the cricket side.
Paul did the cricket side, yes.
So what did you find out there, Paul? What did you start to research once at Perth?
I just looked year by year on Tommy's career.
Okay.
It starts in 1893. He just plays an handful of games. Doesn't bowl.
He's from round here, though.
Oh yeah, he lived on Lowerhouse Fold.
Yeah.
Not where Blaise is. The back-to-back houses that were pulled down, which are where the little green area is now.
At the back of where Blaise is.
No, at the front.
Oh, the front. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Paul's showing me a photograph of, which I think we've seen quite often on the website, of the houses which are in front of the area. So that's where Tommy was born.
That's where he was born, and this sort of back-to-back houses, not very, some of the poorest houses in Lowerhouse.
Yeah.
I mean, nearly all the Lowerhouse houses have survived, except for those really, and High and Low Water Street, which are just above the lodge.
Right.
And they were back-to-back houses, and back-to-back houses in Burnley were looked down upon by the 1960s, and it was decided that they'd all be pulled down. So they were pulled down in the 1960s.
Right.
So he was born in 1875.
He was born in 1875. Yeah. 1894, he gets a little bit of a chance. He bowls only 30 odd overs in the year. but he gets 14 wickets.
So he's playing for Lowerhouse.
He's playing for Lowerhouse.
In the first team.
He's 19 years old by then. He's
Okay.
playing in the first team. He plays probably about 20 games. He doesn't have a big involvement because of the 2 pro system. There's 2 pros at each club, and the profile of these pros are, first of all, bowlers. If they can bat, it's a bonus.
Right.
People wanted value for money on these poor batting tracks.
Yeah.
The bowlers could bowl almost all day.
Yeah.
And so it limited the chances of amateurs. And so Tommy, he bowls 30 odd overs. He gets 14 wickets at 11, very respectable. And then a crucial decision goes Tommy's way. Over the winter, they decide, and it's rare at the time, to get an all-rounder as one of the pros for next season. And they get a chap called A.E. Berry. And he's more of a batter than a bowler. And he gets over 600 runs, which is very, very good at that time of year. But he becomes the 3rd bowler in the team, and Tommy becomes the 2nd bowler.
Okay.
And he gets 55 wickets, and his strike rate and average are better than the pros, who bowls a few more overs and gets 62 wickets. So he's almost a pro quality player by now. He has a sort of meteoric rise. In 1894, Tommy Shutt is a nobody, really. In 1895, he's a somebody.
And he's 20 then?
He's 20.
Yeah. Okay.
He's still a work in progress as a batter, but he gets his maiden half century at Accrington.
Right.
And Lancashire Seconds give him a game as well.
Right.
So he's come from not quite a James Anderson type rise, but not far off in a way.
Right. Yeah.
And then, 1895, he fits the profile of what a pro's about, and so he gets offered terms with Stalybridge Cricket Club.
Yes, for the 1896.
For the 1896 season, and that begins his journey into being a pro, which I think he was a pro for 7 consecutive seasons then. At Stalybridge, they are a team that don't play in a league at that stage. They eventually, about 2 or 3 years later, they joined the Central Lancashire League. But when Tommy played, they played sort of local friendlies against teams like Denton, Alderley Edge, that type of thing. And Tommy does quite well. And then, from out of nowhere, 1897, he's in Perth, at Perthshire Cricket Club, who played on the North Inch in Perth, which is an area of parkland on one side of Perth. There's the North Inch and the South Inch. And the cricket club that Tommy played for were on the North Inch, and he has a great year there. His batting's come on. He's now 22 years old. He sets a club record there of 164 runs against Watsonians, and over the 2 years at Perth, he gets 154 wickets. He's a very popular pro, and they have a benefit for him, and that raises £61. And £61, I worked it out roughly at about 120. A pound then is worth about £125 now. And so he had the equivalent of £7,000 to take on with. So 3 years after working as a weaver, as a young weaver in the mill, he's coming on with the equivalent of £7,000 when Perth don't re-engage him for the 1899 season.
I mean, I'm sure you won't be able to answer this, but so he's gone to play cricket in Scotland as a professional. What would they have been paying him then? We do know that it was about £4 a week, wasn't it?
Well, Richard Miller has looked into how much he was paid. So it says Tommy received £4 a week, which was about £500 now, working on that. That's the sort of accepted, that's buying power, I think. It's what you could have bought with £4, you could buy for £500 now. And that benefit game raised £61. So he had the equivalent of something like £7,000 to come home with. But those terms were better than playing being a county pro, because he had everything all found. County pros had to pay their own expenses and blah, blah, blah. So if you think that a working man would probably get about £1 a week, That's a lot of money, and he did that 2 years running there.
In Perth, yeah.
Right.
And it's a prestigious club. That club, it was.
Yeah.
It's had some fabulous players.
It's surprising how popular. It was a surprise to me, really. I knew that cricket in the Scottish borders is very strong.
Yeah.
Because I've travelled a little bit in the borders. I've seen clubs like Kelso and Selkirk and that, and the facilities are excellent. They're better than ours.
Yeah.
And that surprises you, because you think a lot of Scotsmen look down on cricket, don't they?
Yeah.
An English tough sport.
Yeah.
And as far north as Perth, though, it was very popular, and he talked about crowds of 8,000-10,000 especially for the local derbies.
Yeah.
When they were playing like a local team, and there was a lot of pride at stake.
Yeah.
And so it's it just shows how he'd come on in those 3 years to be involved in that kind of cricket.
I think it was a brave move to go from being born on Lowerhouse Ford and being a weaver and playing, and
within
just
3 years,
initially
within 3 years
even
as
just
well.
going to Stalybridge, just thinking that I can do this at Stalybridge. He possibly would have, he would have carried on working.
He probably
as well.
never left the village except for a game of cricket.
Yes, and then suddenly he's given this opportunity, and he's got the guts to take it.
Yeah.
He's got the self-confidence, which I think comes out in that photo.
It does.
I think he looks like a cricketer, doesn't he? I think
it is. It's where, again, if the listeners go, it almost looks photoshopped.
Yes.
The way it is,
Like
it looks like he could be playing now.
They put him on, haven't they?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yes.
So you've 1890.
That's 1898. Yes. So
1899. Let's. Where did Tommy go there?
Yeah, he came back to Lowerhouse as a professional. It was the last year of the 2-pro system, and he was the second professional to Ben Gregory. Ben Gregory was a Nottinghamshire bowler who'd started at Lowerhouse the year before, 1898, and he was primarily a bowler, but a very good bowler. And I think amongst Lowerhouse pros, he's the second on the list, only Billy Cook slightly ahead of him. He took 352 wickets over 4 seasons. But in the 1899 season, Tommy gets 81 wickets and scores 362 runs. Gregory, 72 wickets and 153 runs. So what we agonised about was whether Tommy was offered to be the sole pro for the 1900 season, and we don't really know that, do we?
No.
But they kept Ben Gregory on, and to be fair, I think he did have that 72 wickets in 1899 was probably his poorest of his 4 seasons.
Right.
And Ben Gregory stays on for 2 more seasons, and Tommy goes back to Scotland. Anne.
Yeah, he goes to Hawick, doesn't he?
Yeah, in the Scottish borders.
Yeah.
So he's got his contacts up there, and it's no different than now.
He's a long way from Perth, though.
But
so we're not sure about the contacts thing, because we don't know the contacts worked on Stalybridge to Perthshire, which is about nearly 300 miles.
I think sometimes we underestimate how in touch people were.
Exactly.
I mean, the newspapers all syndicated reports, so the reports from Birmingham matches in Lancashire would be reported in Scotland, and also if a club wanted a professional, they put an advert in the paper.
Yeah.
So he could have responded.
Yeah,
or
you could reply with your CV and what you've done, and then they could research you fairly easily.
And also,
if they knew him, they would have known what he did at Perth. So
that is what. Yeah. And the cricket world is
it's a small
different.
world.
It is. It's different from a lot of other people. Certainly, good cricketers will talk, will meet, and they will even then, and they still do it now, talk about an individual who is only 23. He's
nearly 25 when he goes to Hawick.
Okay, so he's still very young in his career. Lancashire have had a look, but he doesn't look like he's going to...
Yeah.
He's played 1 or 2 extra games, I think, in 1897 for the second team, but he never got beyond the second team.
Yeah. We think perhaps that he had the year with Lowerhouse, hoping that he was going to get on at Lancashire, and when that didn't materialise, then possibly the Hawick offer was more lucrative.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened that year then? So how did he go on up in...
He does okay. He gets 64 wickets at an excellent average, as you'd appreciate this, at under 6.
Oh, crikey.
But he's playing for a relatively poor team, and we think that some of the teams in the league had financial problems because some of the teams couldn't afford professionals. And I think there's sort of like a gentleman's agreement that if you were playing a team that only had amateurs, you'd drop your professional. And so he doesn't play all the games, does he?
No.
And that must have been a bit disappointing for him, really. So he just has that 1 year at Haig. And do we think that Haig couldn't afford to pay him for...
They couldn't
have paid any pro
they couldn't,
for 1901.
No, they didn't have a pro.
So they went without a pro. So then he comes back and plays in the Liverpool competition for 2 years.
Yeah, so funnily enough, the club he plays for, Northern, that's where Stephen Parry came.
Northern, yeah.
Yeah.
It is, that's right.
They played then at Waterloo Park in Sefton, and it was only after Tommy left, about 5 years later, they moved to Moor Park in Crosby, where I think they still are today.
Right.
And obviously where Stephen Parry emerged in the early part of this century.
So 2 years in the Liverpool
and
Northern.
Yeah, he gets then again not the greatest club. They finished towards the bottom in his first season, but he gets 50 wickets at under 9, so he's doing his job pretty well. And then he gets 48 wickets at 12, not quite as good, in 1902. And it's at that time, that's his last pro job for about 8 or 9 years, because, like you, Jez, he joins the Burnley Police.
Yes,
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes, he joins... He was playing a few games for the police in 1902, as well as playing for Northern. He was playing some midweek games for Burnley Police. So he joined the police force in the end of 1902, I think. But also he gets married in 1903, I think it is. 1903. So I think that is the deciding factor there. He settles down.
Yeah, no going back to Scotland.
So the police force gives him a secure job.
Yeah.
And he gets married and...
he doesn't play any league cricket at all in 03, does he? He just plays for the
He just plays for the police. Well,
okay.
the thing with that appointment or that taking that job in the police force, I think he may have been tapped up a little because the chief constable was obviously very sports minded, so he spent a lot of time in the police force. He was responsible for organising the sports day. He was part of the police swimming gala, and he played cricket. The chief constable also played cricket, so he played cricket in the same team as the chief constable against other. The chief constable set up a league with other town teams, and I think that probably helped his police career, and that might have been why he ended up going to Burnley. The chief constable might have said to him, he transferred from Lowerhouse to Burnley for 1 season, didn't he? 1904, I think that is. And I personally think that's because the chief constable wanted him to. So.
Well, we could get Stan in, who's out on the field in these with his top off in the sun. We could get Stan in, because I can assure you.
We don't. Not in such an enclosed.
No. I can assure you it did happen even in the 1990s, where people got posted to certain areas to play for certain police teams, but not at weekends. It was generally midweek. So when he's gone to Burnley, he's gone there as an amateur, has he?
Yeah, he's gone as an amateur for 1 year. Obviously, people in Lowerhouse weren't particularly happy about it because, I mean, there's a lot of players have played for Burnley and Lowerhouse, a long list of them, but nobody as entrenched in the village as Tommy Shutt, who could sling a cricket ball onto the field from where he was brought up.
Yeah.
And so it did cause a little bit of consternation, but it was only for 1 year. And he had a relatively quiet year, except for 2 games against Rottenstall. He gets 38 wickets on the season. They don't over-bowl him. His best performance is very early on, a 7 for 15 against Enfield. But he gets just over 500 runs, which is very respectable in those days for an amateur. Still is nowadays for an amateur, especially somebody who's primarily a bowler.
Yeah, and on those wickets.
But there is 2 weird games against Rottenstall. He gets just over 500 runs, but he gets 284 in 2 games against Rottenstall.
All right.
He gets 164 at the Wordsworth Memorial Ground, and 120 in the reverse fixture. And we think that is an amateur record to get 284 in one season against one club. And before you think, well, 164 at Rottenstall doesn't really count. I mean, there were no 6-hits in those days.
Yeah.
So he could hit it as far as Clough Forward or Waterfoot, and he was only going to get a 4 for it.
Get 4, yeah.
And you think, well, it might have been a belting track. He gets 164 out of 227.
Yeah.
Right. And so Rottenstall come into bat, only 25 all out. So it couldn't have been that good a track. So out of 252 runs scored in that game in 1904, he scores 164 of them, which is a hell of a percentage. And I bet you've rarely seen that, Jez, where somebody gets such a big percentage of both teams' totals.
Yeah. No,
it's amazing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And his bowling figures, did he...
Well, he got 38 wickets on the season for Burnley.
No, sorry, in that game against Rottenstall.
I don't think he bowled.
Right, okay.
I don't think he bowled in either game against Rottenstall.
He didn't need to.
He didn't really need to, no. And the only twice in Lancashire League history that we've found where somebody got more than 284 runs in a season are in 1951, the great Australian Bill Alley got just over 300 for Colne against Bacup. 250 plus scores, and the record is held by somebody who I'm sure you had a lot of banter with over the years, Jez, a certain Australian called Peter Sleep.
Yeah, I did.
He weren't shy.
No, he wasn't.
You know, and you could.
No, he was a good player.
Yeah, but one thing about him, you could hear the chat from the boundary,
yes.
So he didn't hide what he was saying.
No, he didn't.
And Peter, I think in 1990, gets 150 and 170 for Rishton against Church.
Right.
So
that probably eclipses...
that eclipses Tommy's score, those two, but they were done by professionals. Tommy did it in an amateur capacity at Burnley. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we mentioned the sports loving chief constable.
Yeah.
So eventually the watch committee who were in charge of the police decided that the police should really be concentrating on fighting crime instead of having all this fun. Right. And they started an investigation into the chief constable. So he resigned before he was pushed in 1905, and the watch committee disbanded the police team and took the instruments back off the police brass band, which the chief constable had also founded.
Brilliant.
They did have police teams later on, but for a while they didn't.
Right.
And then, not long after that, Tommy left the force in 1905.
I wonder if they found there was a correlation between the police cricket games and crime in the area.
They definitely did. I think they definitely did.
It was the time to commit crimes while the game was on.
Yeah. So then he came back, didn't he?
So he was on in the police a couple of years then?
He was in from 1903 to 1906.
He comes back to Lowerhouse. He's still a policeman when he comes back to Lowerhouse.
So in 1905 he plays out.
He's back at Lowerhouse, but not playing all the time.
No, because he's still in the police.
Right.
Okay.
So he has a quietish year again on the bowling front. Only 36 wickets, but the highlight is he gets 173 not out at Bentgate against Aslindham in a convincing house win. Again, no 6-hits are awarded, and unlike his Burnley record, which just lasted 2 years, because an ex-Lowerhouse player called Henry Cudworth beats it and gets 166, Tommy's 173 lasted until Ben beat it.
Yeah, correct.
Benny in 2018 when he got 175.
Yeah.
When he snicked one in the first over
Allegedly.
Well, allegedly, but I think everybody heard it except the umpire. But anyway, Ben did obviously pass it, but he got a lot of sixes that day. So, I mean, us who go back a long way tend to think Tommy has the moral record, like really. But and so that's his highlight in 05. And then he has another 5 years now at Lowerhouse, And in that time, he leaves, doesn't he? He leaves the place and becomes landlord at the Cricketers.
Yeah, he takes on the Cricketers Arms, which
I don't know if you
used
remember
to
that,
be.
Jez.
I do.
Yeah, it's demolished now. Isn't
There's a
it?
house there.
There's a house
There's a house
there.
there.
108 Lowerhouse Lane it is.
Right.
There's an house exactly where the Cricketers was.
Yeah.
It got pulled down in 1985.
Yeah, I do remember it. Yeah, I think
Very small pub.
that's right. Yeah, stand up.
About the same sort of size as the Red House
Yeah.
in Rosegrove, only perhaps smaller than that.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah, so he was there till about 1910, I think.
Yeah, right. So 06 to 1910 was a sort of mini golden age for Lowerhouse. Before 06, from 1892 to 1905, they're always in the bottom 2 or 3, often bottom, and then they suddenly emerge and have 6 consecutive top half finishes. And if you look in Lancashire League history, it was Lowerhouse's best run in the whole century, because they were a very consistent team. They had some really good players, J. Elliott, Joseph Cook, who was the record run scorer up until the Second World War. He got nearly 5,000 runs. Matt Walker, who I think was related to Stan.
He's
His granddad, was it? Yeah, great-granddad. His granddad.
His granddad.
And Billy and Tommy Whittaker, who weren't related, but were good all-rounders for the club. And on the Hall of Fame list, they were on for batting and bowling. Lowerhouse had a really strong team. They would have been an excellent team if the Worsley Cup had have existed and the current restrictions on bowling would have been there. But they were always vulnerable against teams that had a really good pro and just one strong amateur.
Yeah.
Like Burnley. I mean, 1906 to 08, Burnley won an hat-trick of championships. They had Billy Cook was a young, fast bowler in those days who was getting over 100 wickets a season.
Yeah.
And they had good amateur bowling to back them up. And they could just about outdo us. But we were getting sort of, I think, with 2 4th-place finishes. And Lowerhouse's highlight was the 2nd place in 1910, when we were just behind Rishton. Just behind Colne. Colne were the champions that year. And Lowerhouse was 2nd, and that was the club's best finish until 1982.
Yeah.
And Tommy gets in 1907, he gets 74 wickets, which is the club record, and he beats his own record in 1910. And the publicity of that, we think, got him a pro's job at Rishton. Right. He's obviously a family man now. He only has one son, but he doesn't want to travel too far, and so being Rishton pro is ideal for him. Yeah. And
so what year was he the pro at Rishton?
He was pro at Rishton for 1 year in 1911.
Okay.
And I was just looking at some figures. He's 76 wickets at Lowerhouse, which is still a club record. Yeah. Even you didn't manage to beat that, Jez.
No, I never got over 60.
And we're taking in 1,564 balls. Now, Rishton really worked him hard. They made him earn his money. And he got 82 wickets, which was his best ever season. But it took him 2,367 balls to get those. Yeah. And an highlight for Tommy that year was on returning to Lowerhouse as professional. He scored his only century for Rishton at Lowerhouse.
Right.
Yeah, against Lowerhouse.
Against Lowerhouse, yeah.
All these wickets here,
yeah,
right.
So,
but Rishton didn't keep him on. He'd had a good season, but I think they thought they could do a little bit better. And they had a good amateur side at that time, Rishton. And so they signed a player called John Newstead, who's a Yorkshireman, and he went on to get about 300 runs more than Tommy, and he also took almost 100 wickets, and that helped Rishton to be champions in 1912.
Yeah, you'd think so with that.
And so Tommy has his last pro engagement in 1912, and it's his only season in the Ribblesdale League. He moves very locally to Reed Cricket Club.
Yeah, I mean, the census of 1911 has him as a weaver. Right. None of the censuses have him as a professional cricketer. He's always been a worker as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, so it's not full time.
So he's never declared that he was
Yeah.
a professional cricketer.
Yeah.
Censuses are only every 10 years, obviously.
Yes.
But in 1911, he was a weaver.
Was he a weaver in the 1901 census?
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
do we think that obviously he's playing for the Northern Club at Crosby? Do we think he worked at least part time?
I think he must have done.
Yeah,
I think
to supplement his income.
Yeah, he must have just been a Saturday pro, I think, at Liverpool. So then he's getting on a bit by now, isn't he, Paul? He comes back to Lowerhouse.
Yeah,
he stays at Lowerhouse.
He spends a season at Reed.
After that, he comes back.
And he has some good performances at Reed, but he's 37 by now. Just wrote one or two of his performances down. He got against Burnley St Andrews. He got a 67 in one game, and in the reverse fixture he gets a 6 for 83. And Burnley St Andrews, who are still known as St Andrews Cricket and Bowling Club, were one of the top Ribblesdale League clubs in that era.
I didn't
they won the championship.
They won the championship in 1912 for the fourth time in the Ribblesdale Senior League. But that was the highlight of for them. By the 1920s, they were in sort of trouble on and off the field. They were mostly bottom, sometimes second from bottom, and the club were having financial problems. And I think they resigned from the league in 1927 and never to return.
And do you think that's Burnley St Andrews, as in the up on Eastern Avenue?
Oh yeah.
That's
where they played. Yeah, that's where they played their own.
Yeah,
they were in the Ribblesdale League.
In the senior division.
They were a big.
4 times champions of the senior league.
Because that was still a good, decent cricket ground when I was at school.
They used to play schoolboys cricket.
When I played for the town team at cricket at 15, 16, that was our own team. We never got to play on Burnley or Lowerhouse.
No.
And it was a decent cricket ground.
Yeah.
It was a reasonable size.
Yeah.
Certainly for schoolboy cricket.
Yeah.
So 1913.
He returns to Lowerhouse.
He's coming back to Lowerhouse.
And that's for good. He doesn't play for any other clubs then. He has a good first year, 1913. He takes 63 wickets, and as often he did, he outbowls the pro. He gets more wickets than the pro. And then 1914, a drop off, 39 wickets, which a quiet season for him. And he has a poor season batting, really. His batting has probably passed his best by then, and he doesn't get a score above 30. And Lowerhouse, from 1911, the first season he's left them, they finish 5th. They have a really good season, and they only one win below the eventual champions that year. But unfortunately, 1912 onwards, it reverts to the same old Lowerhouse from before 1906, and they finished rock bottom in 1912, even though the first Test player to ever play for Lowerhouse plays that day, a Yorkshireman called Walter Lees, who's played about 5 or 6 Test matches. He doesn't have a bad year himself, but they just have a disastrous year, and they're back at rock bottom in 1914, the year of the outbreak of the war. The league sort of carries on with 8 professionals in 15 and 16, and Tommy, I think he only took 20 wickets in 1915, and 1916 he takes somewhere in the 40s, which, given the weakness of the league with no pros, so many good amateurs at war, it's I've called it an half-hearted effort by Tommy. Really, I'm sure if he'd have sort of put his mind to it, he could have got more than that, because we see after the war that he's still quite a good player, certainly for a few years after the Second World War, even though he's getting to his mid-40s by now.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, Paul. He's saying half-hearted. The lad's 40. He's bowled himself to the ground for a number of years.
Exactly. I agree with you there, Jez. But we'll come on to what he did after the war.
Yeah, okay.
And then you might sort of see my point of view.
Okay.
But also, we don't know the circumstances.
No.
We don't know what he was. He would have been working still as a weaver. People were restricted in the hours he may have had to work longer than he was normally doing because everybody was very regulated as to what they...
I'm convinced though that the Tommy Shutt that we'll see just after the war, if he'd have set his mind to it, could have outdone his own record.
You're
and I'll tell you why. No, I'm not. If you look at it, the Lowerhouse bowling record should have gone in 1916, but not to Tommy Shutt. It should have gone to Billy Whittaker, who died later on in the war. Billy was about 38 years old, and he wasn't conscripted or anything because of his age, but he later joined up. But in 1916, Billy Whittaker takes 71 wickets with 5 games to go, because of the weakness of the competition. And he sort of goes off to enlist in late July, because we've had the bottle of the Somme, and it's been a disaster, really, in terms of the lives lost. And sort of they're asking people into their early 40s to join up, and Billy, he sort of goes and joins up. If he'd have played the last 5 games, he'd have probably got about 90 wickets.
And what year is that? 16?
That's 1916. That's 1916, and that was the last year of cricket during the war, because it was decided then to suspend the Lancashire League. There's a lot of cricket records, bowling records, by amateurs set during the First World War, and especially in 1916. Some clubs recognise them, some don't. I mean, I remember a friend of mine, Trevor Jones, beating the Burnley record and getting 72 wickets. But in 1916, John Bracewell gets 90 wickets for Burnley. But Burnley never recognised that as a record.
No.
Because of the
it wasn't
weakness
a
of
proper
the
league.
But Accrington and 2 other clubs, I think, still have the 1916 figures. And they've never been beaten, and probably never will be, obviously under the current restrictions. They won't be. And so that takes us to 1919, doesn't it? You know, when the Lancashire League returns, and so does Tommy.
So 1918.
No cricket in 1918.
No cricket,
there was 1 or 2 friendly games, wasn't there? But very little cricket.
So we go to 1919.
Even in 1919, there were still people were coming back in dribs and drabs as well, weren't they? From service.
But there was a full Lancashire League.
There was a full league,
season.
but 1920 is probably when it really gets going.
Right. So Tommy comes back in 1919. He takes 45 wickets, and he's by now he's 44 years old, and he's still getting some scores with the bats. He gets 63 at home to Haslingden, and 2 40s, 40 odds against East Lancashire, and 49 not out against Baycup. Now this is where your mind might boggle a bit, Jeff. 1920, he's bowling in tandem with Billy Cook, and Billy Cook can still bowl well, because in 1921 he went on to get 130 wickets for Lowerhouse, which is a club record, and it's 18 higher than anybody's ever got. But Tommy, in 1920, at 45 years old, gets 68 wickets.
And he's 45.
He's 45, and it's his best. It's his best, really, for Lowerhouse since the record-breaking season of 1910. And he has a really good day at Enfield, where he gets his highest score of the season, 67 runs, and he gets a 4 for 38. And we mention here that he bats. Sorry, he doesn't bat in tandem, but a young Enfield player that day was Eddie Painter, who went on to become a legendary English Test player in the 1930s. And Eddie was 27 years Tommy's junior, and he must have been really impressed with Tommy's performance at 45 years of age, getting 67 and 4 for 38. And of course, Eddie Painter's averaged over 60 for England in about the 20 odd tests he played, and he's particularly remembered in the Bodyline series because he was ill in bed, and he insisted on returning to the wicket at Brisbane in the roasting hot weather.
So he's 45 years of age.
Yeah, and I think Anne probably wants to mention the benefit match that he was allocated.
68 wickets that year. So that is his 1920 and his benefit game came.
The league you had to get league permission to give someone a benefit, but they were allocated to players who'd really given a lot of service to a club. So he'd done 17 years with Lowerhouse, I think it was. So they gave him a benefit game, and of course it rained.
And what years was that?
That was 1920.
They had sold some tickets, hadn't they?
Yeah, it was 17th of July 1920, but the report where it urges people to turn out for him says that he was universally popular.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite a thing, that people are always popular when they've died, but when they're still alive, if a newspaper says that somebody's they were liked wherever they played, then I think it does give you a clue as to the fact that he wasn't just a good cricketer, he was a popular chap as well.
I'm sure some of these Conservative MPs who were having a go at Boris Johnson, if Boris dies today, they would say what a jolly good chap he was.
I'm not sure about that, Paul, but anyway, we're not getting political on this.
We'll leave that to
But that's the general thing. I remember, say, somebody like controversial like Tony Benn dying, and a lot of Conservatives came out and said what a great parliamentarian he was. Yeah. And they wouldn't have said it to his face.
No, they wouldn't.
Well, everybody sprouts wings when they die.
Yes, and your point is exactly.
But the point is that there are several mentions over his career that people liked him.
Yeah.
So, and he was a landlord. I think he probably made a very good landlord. At the cricketers, but in between time he also went to work for the 1921 census has him working for Butterworth and Dickinson's, which was ironworks and cotton machine building place in Rosegrove. So he's still a working man.
Can we pause this? I just need to make a phone call. So that's 1920, where the benefit game is for good old Tommy Shutt. There's a bit of rain around, but there's a good write-up in the press for him, which you can see on the website, which again will give you some links to on Twitter and other social medias that you can look for so you can get the pictures of what this great conversation is about between myself, Anne and Paul. So Paul, that's the 1920s. What was Tommy about following the 1920 season? How did he go? He's now in his late 40s. Well,
he's still putting a good shift in, Jez.
Okay.
By 1923, he bowled over 200 overs, and by now he's 48 years old.
Yeah.
So I know that'll make you sweat, Jeff. Just thinking about doing 200 overs at that rate.
Yeah, well it did.
He takes 43 wickets in 1923, and then in 1924, which is his last full season at the club, he's still doing plenty of overs, and he's the leading bowler at the club. He has 48 wickets, and he actually outbowls Jack Cuff, the pro, who takes 44. Okay. And even though the team is last in the league, he's still like a workhorse for the team. And we think it's because he's set the quest to get 1,000 wickets.
Oh, right, I see.
I think they were very aware at that time of their stats, much more aware of more modern players before Nigel Stockley. And I'll give you an example. Brian Higgin, at some time in the 1980s, passed Herbert Lawson to become Lowerhouse's leading amateur run scorer. And I asked Brian, I said, would you know what game it was when you passed him? And he said to me, I didn't even know what the record was, and I didn't know. Now, it'd be interesting to know if Blaise knew when he passed Brian, because obviously Blaise has set the figures, and I'm not even sure he did. But we think that Tommy knew exactly how far short he was of the 1,000, and when he set the quest for 1,000, we don't know. Was he 46, 47 years old, or was it when he passed 900 wickets? Again, we can't be sure. But in 1924, he's 49 years old.
Yeah.
And he takes 48 wickets. Yeah. And his team are in last place position. And he's an amateur. So you wonder
Yeah.
if this 1,000 wicket quest is the one thing that's keeping him going.
Yeah.
And the highlight for him in that season, in the 1924 Worsley Cup quarter-final, Lowerhouse had drawn at Burnley. And Lowerhouse had a poor innings, they 92 all out. But they managed to bowl Burnley out for 44. And Tommy, at 49 years old, gets 5 for 18.
Good lad.
Which is incredible.
Good lad.
Unfortunately, the semi-final, Lowerhouse had drawn away at Accrington, but it's quite a close game and they lose by 3 wickets. So they could have been in the Worsley Cup final well before 1980 when they actually reached one.
Yeah.
And so we get to 1925, and Tommy is 18 wickets short going into that season of the 1,000 wickets. And on June the 20th at Alexandra Meadows, he gets 3 for 45, and it leaves him on 999, which is a good one for a policeman.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the next game is fairly quick because it's the following Tuesday. A lot of people probably don't know that until around about 1970 there were no Sunday games. All the games were on Saturday, and so you didn't have double headers, and so each team had to get a couple of midweek games in, and they tended to play them on what we used to call half-day closing days.
Of course, yeah.
Which you were old enough to remember.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Yes.
On Tuesdays in Burnley.
Tuesday in Burnley. So in that game, and it was the only Lancashire League game played on that date, Tommy got Frank Edwards, the Haslingden Pro, out for 22, and he reached the 1,000 wicket mark. And as I said, it was very fitting that he got the opposition pro because 31 years before he got the church professional Tom Flowers out, and that was his very first wicket all those years before.
Yeah.
And he did play one more game at Turf Moor the Saturday after that, and he never bowled. He'd no need to. He got his 1,000 wickets.
Yeah.
And he batted at number 9, and he scored 9. And Lowerhouse beat Burnley by 81 runs, and I think that was an excellent way to go out at 50 years of age.
Sure.
And that was his last game.
That was his last game for Lowerhouse.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so a fabulous career.
Fascinating.
Even so many years on, you've still to acknowledge that he was a special cricketer when you bear in mind his background and his circumstances and that he was a working chap as well. And
just one story I'd like to tell from going back to 1910 is about 3 or 4 years ago, Paddy got 80 odd and 7 for 27.
Yeah.
And Harry Brooks said to me, that must be the best amateur performance in Lowerhouse history. And he actually put on the website, if anybody can think of anybody who can outdo that, anybody who's outdone that in history, there's a bottle of good quality champagne on offer. Now, a lot of people think I was up by candlelight researching this. I actually found it in 5 minutes. 1910, at home to East Lancs, Tommy got 6 for 23. And as I put it in the article that you'll be able to read on the website, it was an excellent 6 for 23. All 6 for 23s are great for the bowler, but he got 4 clean bowled and 2 carton bowled. Yeah. And that's a pure 6 for 23. No dodgy LBW decisions. No player treading on his wicket or anything like that.
Or being caught
by a miracle catch. Or
all his own work.
And in that day against East Lancs, he also got, as well as 6 for 23, 113 not out.
Okay.
And so I submitted this to Harry Brooks, and Harry, being the gentleman that he always was, got me the champagne and presented it to me. And it was a Moët and Chandon. And it's still at home. And my plan with that champagne was to give it to Blaise when he passed Michael Ingham.
Right.
And unfortunately, That's dragged on, and it's possibly not going to happen now. In fact, it probably won't happen now. So it will go to Blaise on his retirement.
Oh, that's lovely. I thought you were going to say you've got it here with a bucket of ice.
No. Well, Blaise might let you have a drop.
Yeah.
But it's certainly very good quality champagne. It's not for spraying over people.
No.
And probably a nice meal for him and Lindsay.
Yeah, and it's a nice memory of Harry, isn't it?
Of course it is. Yeah. That was a great story, that is. And poor Paddy will have to do it again.
Well,
to outdo Tommy Shutt from 1920.
Yeah. From 1910.
1910, sorry.
Yeah, when he was at his peak.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's I've really enjoyed that, Paul. Thanks very much, and thanks for all the research and the way you've delivered this. It'll come across really well for people who are interested in the history and who want to listen to stories like that. Thanks ever so much, Paul. I'll come back to you shortly to finish off. Right. Anne, is there anything you want to just talk us through? We've gone through Tommy's history. Anything you want to just talk us through before we finish off? I see you've got all your laminated sheets out and the posters all ready to go.
Well, this is going to be on the website as a slightly longer read, but we've done some timelines and a banner, and we're hoping to put that up on the ground.
Yeah.
To tie in with the fact that the club was founded in August, 160 years ago. So we're tying this in. So there will be some display materials, there'll be something on the website. And just to finish Tommy's life story, he'd finished cricket, and he'd only had one son, who was Victor. I should mention also perhaps that Tommy had several brothers who also played for Lowerhouse, including a much older half-brother, a step from me,
Richard
Holden, who was one of the main people involved in the cricket club in the very early days.
Okay.
And he was the first Lowerhouse amateur to score a century.
He was the first league century. So there were other Shutts who played for Lowerhouse, and there were sons of other Shutts who played for Lowerhouse, but Tommy himself only had the one son, Victor, who did play some second 11 cricket, I think. But he died in 1904. He was only in his 20s.
1931. He was born in
he was born in 1904,
okay.
yes. And he died in 1931. He was only in his 20s, and it was in a flu epidemic.
Yeah.
So he probably died in a flu epidemic. Yeah. So Tommy only had one direct descendant, who was Victor's son, John. When he finished playing cricket in 1931, he and Alice took over the Victoria pub in Habergham for a while, for 3 years. During that time, Victor, like I say, they lost their only son. They came back to Lowerhouse. He kept up contact with Lowerhouse over the years, and they lived locally.
They lived on opposite where Blaise lives now.
Yes, and
232
Alice.
Lowerhouse Lane.
Yeah, Alice, who he'd married in 1904, and they'd been married a long time. She died in 1939, which left him probably for the first time in his life living alone on Lowerhouse Lane. There's a register, the government did a register in 1939 to be war ready, so they knew about what the population was. And he's listed as being a retired machine moulder. That was his job at Butterworth and Dickinson's. And he, then we don't know quite how he spent the war years. I imagine that because he was a single person, he probably went to live with extended family so that his rations would go. It would make sense to be in a family situation.
Because he would have been about 64-ish then?
Yes, well, he'd be a bit older than that. He was born in...
about 64, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next thing that the records show about him was that in April 1946, when he was 71, he married the landlady of the White Horse in Habergham.
Right, okay.
And that was then his home until he died in 1952, aged 76. And he's buried in Habergham churchyard. He was buried with Alice, his first wife. Grave's a little bit sad and neglected now. The gravestone's quite legible, and it has his parents' names and his wife Alice. It also has the names of some children that his parents lost in infancy, which
But unfortunately not Tommy's name itself.
Right.
But Tommy's name itself was never added to the grave. I know Paul's quite motivated about this. He does think it should have been, but time, I don't know, life moves on, doesn't it? I think if you don't do something like that at the time, possibly.
Yeah.
And it would have been either down to his son,
Yeah.
or his grandson, or his widow, or his extended
yeah.
family, and anyway, it never happened.
Yeah.
So.
And he spends the rest, the late part of his life at the White Horse in Padiham, doesn't he?
The last 6 years.
Assisting he gets married to the landlady,
yes.
who's been widowed during the Second War.
Yeah, I mean, she is the landlady. She has spent a lifetime in the licensed trade. Yes, so.
But it's a job he knows, obviously, because he's done it at the Cricketers.
He's done it at the Cricketers and the Victoria, and possibly he was working there as well. We don't know.
Yeah.
So that was
brilliant.
That was
brilliant.
It.
That is so interesting, you two. Before we mop up, I'm sure that I know, Anne, you want to make a mention for the help you've had off various people, and the Perthshire cricket.
Particularly. I mean, yes, he was so helpful. He's written a lot about that. There's a chap called Richard Miller who sparked all this off.
Yeah.
He was very helpful. He gave me a lot of advice about how to put it together, and he's done a lot of research himself on early cricket in Perthshire, and he's published quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously. You've given credit to Nigel Stockley. The website there is a fantastic resource.
Yeah, it's good.
I think Paul wants to just mention Tommy's legacy, perhaps. Cricketing legacy.
Obviously we talked about the 1,000 wickets.
Yeah.
Which is just over 400 clear of yourself, Jez.
Yeah, that's right.
But you did great. Tommy started at 18 as a bowler.
I was a lot later.
You were like sort of a manufactured bowler, if you don't mind me saying so, who filled a void and did it brilliantly for Lowerhouse, and worked just as hard as Tommy at your bowling. Tommy has the two best individual seasons in club history, with 76 and 74 wickets respectively. The only two that we found over 70 are that Billy Whittaker in 1916 with 71, and Jim Minnis. Who was later a pro for Lowerhouse, and he got in the mid-1950s he got 72 wickets. So he got 5 wickets for Lowerhouse 69 times, which is a really good achievement, and over 500 wickets as a pro on other grounds. And also the batting side of his game. When he retired, he was only 24 short of the record for Lowerhouse. He got 4,687 runs for Lowerhouse, as well as his great bowling achievements. And I think the batting side of his game is the one that interests me more than his bowling, because he was always very consistent as a bowler. He took wickets wherever he went. He was always there to put a shift in. He had decent fitness. He didn't have many seasons where he missed games through injury. But the batting side of his game is very interesting. He only averaged 14, but he got 6 Lancashire League centuries. And one stat I liked, I don't know if Anne liked it quite as much, is at Burnley he has the third highest ever score, 164 by an amateur or a pro for Burnley. And at Lowerhouse he has 173 not out, which is the second highest by pro or amateur. So I put the stat together that there's, I think, about 55,000 innings by Lowerhouse and Burnley players combined in Lancashire League history.
Okay.
And Tommy Shutt has 2 of the best 5 scores. And he wasn't even primarily a batter. He was a bowler who batted. Which I think is a great stat.
That's a good stat, isn't it?
Yeah, to be up there.
And just the legacy, Tommy's legacy, I think, has been neglected a little bit at the club. And not only Tommy, that side from 1906 to 1911 was a very good team. And that's partly why I put, obviously you've seen it, the Hall of Fame list.
Mm.
And there's a lot of players from that era on, and that's their only legacy at the club.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that stands out. And I'd like some kind of artifact or mural, as Anna said, to acknowledge what they did for the club. Because in that era, in the whole 20th century, they put together the most consistent 6 years in Lowerhouse history. Yeah. And it's only in the current century that we've outdone that.
Yeah.
You know, and it would be nice if
would.
there was something to remember about, not just the Hall of Fame list, but at least that's something, because it's brought names that a lot of people at Lowerhouse didn't really know about.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, Paul. Yeah, and it is something I'm sure that Matt Stanley will look at, and I'm sure you'd help him with it, you know, to get something together. That is really interesting. So we've had a fantastic chat there for an hour or so. I've really enjoyed it. What a great story it is there. Anne, is there anything you want to add before we finish up?
Yeah, I'd just like to give a shout out to another little project we've got going. This is all tying in with the club being 160 years old this August. And together with your Adam, we're doing a virtual walking time around the ground.
Right.
Now, I don't quite understand how this works, but Adam's doing QR codes, a QR code for each of the 4 sides of the ground.
Yeah.
And if you scan the QR code, it will take you to some photos on the website which date mostly between 1950s and 1980s.
Yeah.
So you can see what that particular part of the ground looked like in days gone by, which will be a bit of an eye-opener to some people, because sometimes it looks so dilapidated.
I know.
Really,
grey sky.
Really. And of course it's always raining.
Of course, it's always dark.
So that's just another little project that we've got going. So I think that might be a bit of a first.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I've not heard it before, certainly. Anyway, never mind the Lancashire League. Yeah. So, we'll have a look at that. So, I really enjoyed that, Anne. Thanks ever so much. And Paul, thanks very much for putting all this together and talking us through. I've enjoyed going through that life of Tommy Shutt. I didn't know 95% of that. So, listeners, have a look online. Look at these stats. Look at the photographs that we've discussed. You will enjoy it, I'm sure, when you look at on the website. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Housecast, then you'll get the episodes before anyone else. Thanks everyone for listening, and goodbye.
Send more house to save the house.